0 nay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
House Bill 2077. There are two amendments.
Just the second amendment, Mr. Chairman, is what I'm wanting to
The
adopt.
second amendment is what we'll be taking up. You're recognized to explain amendment number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this is a bill you probably haven't heard much about, but there were a couple concerns raised in committee, so we went ahead and did that amendment to go ahead and address those concerns. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions on the amendment? Representative Provenzano, you recognize a question on the amendment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'll hold my questions to the main bill.
All right. Without objection, we'll adopt the amendment. On unanimous consent, you are recognized to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, House Bill 2077 would simply create an online transparency portal. Be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Provenzano, recognize question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative. So under this bill, if you're a parent of a child in a district, why would you not want to keep this information available at the local level? What's the purpose of a statewide platform?
It doesn't eliminate the access at a local level.
You're recognized for follow-up.
What is the purpose of a statewide platform?
To make it more accessible.
You're recognized for follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will citizens and groups who do not reside or have children in a school district have access to these materials, even if they don't live in the district?
Absolutely, and that's done with intent, because I will tell you that my personal opinion is that what happens at our local schools would affect the entire community. If we don't think our schools affect the entire community, then I think we probably need to re-examine why we're asking all of our citizens in the state to pay for them and why we spend more than 50% of our budget on education.
There is an impact on the bill. We'll be striking title by unanimous consent. Without objection, that'll be the order. Back on the bill. Representative Provenzano, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'll ask one more, then get back in the queue. So I have several teachers reaching out to me who have been the subject of social media attacks based on intentional misrepresentations of curriculum by fringe groups. What liability will the state incur because of threats and harassment as a result of this implementation of this platform?
None, assuming that what you've just said is that the stories you've heard were accurate, and I have no reason to think that they're not. Obviously, those attacks are already happening. What I would say is that I think something like this would actually make those attacks less likely to happen. So instead of relying on what you heard down at the coffee shop or what you heard on Twitter or Facebook, you can actually go and access it right now to see, hey, is this in our schools or not? It makes it very easy, very accessible. So I think this type of system would actually make that a lot less likely to happen.
Representative Hessenbeck, recognize question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Title is stricken. Are you willing to continue to work with us so that this bill becomes a product of the House before we hear it on the House floor?
Sure, absolutely. The amendment that I put was in large part a lot due to some of the concerns that you raised. You talked about not wanting to take some of the spontaneity out of things, and as I told you in committee, that was not my intent. My intent was to just give a window and more accessible. So that's why we struck the language to take any potential burden and off the teacher like we discussed. So happy to continue to work on it to make it better.
Representative Ranson, recognize question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, are you concerned that this would usurp any conversation between parent and teacher?
Not at all. I think I would take this as a first step, hopefully. This is not changing policy. In an ideal world, they would take a look at this. If they have a concern, that first step should always be to go visit with the teacher and to better understand their concerns. And if they can't solve the issue, it would continue to move up the chain of command, so to speak, as it is now. So I think it's important to note this bill doesn't take away or change the existing process at all. It really is just opening up a window to allow more people to access and to make things more transparent. So I hope it would encourage some of those conversations but it would do it so in a more informed way.
You're recognized for a follow-up.
Thank you. Could you explain then the process that this will take? From my understanding that it is being housed, the portal will be housed at the State Department. Is it the individual teacher's responsibility to put in information? Is it site level? Is it district level? What is the process?
That's a great question. So no, it would be, so the bill gives the State Department a couple options. One, they can either do the website themselves, or they can contract with a third-party vendor to do this. The state of Texas has already been doing this for about a decade. Tennessee's been doing it for about 5 years. There's about a half dozen other states that are getting ready to come online with something exactly like this. So the way it would work is they would simply, if they chose to use a vendor, the district would simply notify the vendor as far as, hey, here's the curriculum, here's what textbooks we use. The vendor would then go ahead and utilize their already existing contacts with vendors and go ahead and put that access that information online. There's no requirement no expectation for a teacher, for example, to sit there and have to go through and digitize textbooks and things like that. All that's going to be done by the vendor at the department level. Sorry.
You're recognized for a follow-up.
Thank you. This will be my last question. So then, you mentioned textbooks. So what about classrooms that do not use textbooks? An example, music teacher. I created my own curriculum based on state standards and national standards, and my door was open at all times. And so how do we account for classrooms that maybe don't fit like the regular classroom environment, such as our specials?
Well, again, if you're talking about, I'd have to go, I'd love to discuss more about it because I'd be interested to see exactly where you're going with that. But if you're talking about any type of, if it's totally brand new and made up independent curriculum, that's something we probably have to discuss. I don't think that's probably the case for the majority of folks in which we're trying to deal with this. Again, we're trying to make this a more effective process. Since this bill has been out there, I've heard from some parents who, quite frankly, the current process hasn't been very effective. I'm glad to hear that you were a teacher with an open door. I think that's probably 99.99999%. Unfortunately, that's not the case probably in all. Just today, I think there was a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C., where you had a mom that was sued over some of this access. So again, we're just trying to open a window to provide some accessibility to that. But I'd be happy to work with you on that. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the specificity of that. We'll figure out a way to make that work, and if we can't, then we would sit there and I'd be happy to exclude it from the bill.
Representative Goodwin, recognized question on the bill.
Thank you. When you say this is just to provide transparency, you've got on page 3, it says, line 11, number 7, it says public and private comment by users with real-time processing of comments, reviews, and feedback. User authentication shall be required, and comments may be cataloged and stored for compliance and auditing purposes. So can you speak to that in terms of the issue of freedom of speech and comments that are made, and you say this material might be used for auditing purposes? What do you think might happen that requires auditing?
Well, some of that language has been struck by the amendment, would be my first response to that. But
for clarity.
Okay.
You're recognized for a follow-up.
Can you tell me, according to your amendment specifically, when you say some of that has been struck, which of that has been struck by the amendment?
So it says in the amendment, I think you've got, if you don't have a copy, I apologize, I try to get everyone a copy of it before the committee meeting, but it says, page 3, section 1, lines 11 and 12, by deleting with real-time processing of comments, reviews, and feedback. And then it continues on in section 12, and then the new language there.
But line 14.
Let me know if you'd like an answer. But
You're recognized for a follow-up, and then I'm going to ask you to get back in the queue.
Well,
That'll be your last one. That's 3. Go.
Lines 13 and 14 are not struck, and that's where we talk about information being stored for compliance and auditing purposes.
Okay, so is that your question? I'm just trying to understand, I tried to answer your questions, you kept interrupting me, so I want to make sure I'm answering your question.
Restate your question, please.
I think we were talking over each other, so apologies. The question was, on 13 and 14 being that it's not been amended, what is it that you are seeking to do when we're talking about for auditing, for compliance and auditing purposes? Who's going to be auditing?
And that's,
Well, now I think,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Just trying to answer your question.
or are you talking over me like you accused me of doing?
Okay. Well, anyway, let me go ahead and answer your question. So as it says in the amendment, and what the purpose is that people can go online to comment. The State Department would review, that's why we added the additional language. The State Department would review those comments. If those comments are concerns and need to be passed on to the district, then they would be utilized in that way to pass on those concerns from interested parties as far as that goes. As far as the auditing purposes, that's done as a protection to ensure that they're appropriate type comments. We had some concerns in committee that you wouldn't have people just going out there and throwing on, I think somebody called, like, we're worried about internet trolls and some of those kind of things. So it's just basically we're going to retain the comments, and then if there's an issue, we can go back and say, let's audit it to see what those comments were. That's all we tried to do with that. We actually tried to make that process better and cleaner by doing it that way.
Representative Bennett, recognized question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so Representative, the stated purpose of this is to better facilitate conversations between teachers and parents about the curriculum that their students are consuming. Is that correct?
I would say it's better to facilitate communication between parents, community members, people that are interested. I mean, I think anybody who's been paying attention the last, I'm going to say 3 years, we've certainly seen an increase in these type of conversations and interest in curriculum increase exponentially. So no matter on what side of the camp you're on, I tried to fashion this as a somewhat of a middle-of-the-road type process, because otherwise we're going to continue to keep coming back and have these type of conversations. And if we don't sit there and provide some access, I think my fear is that you're going to come up with something that's going to end up being a lot more restrictive. So we've tried to find something, I think here, I've tried to find something that is just simply gains access. I think hopefully you would agree that more information is going to provide better conversations.
Recognized for follow-up.
Yeah, the problem is we have more access to information than we've ever had before, and our society seems more resistant to actually consuming facts than ever before. And so my fear here, and I wonder if you agree, is that what we're actually creating is yet another avenue for people to, even though the facts will be right there, like I'm envisioning a book, the front of which, the cover of which is shown on this website, and then people comment about it, and they start talking about what's in it without knowing what's in it. And then we're ginned up with anger and frustration, and this provides an opportunity for parents and other community members who actually don't have a child in the school to get riled up, organized, and show up at school and disrupt learning. So to your point, I do think there are two sides of the coin here, people who want kids to get educated and people who want to politicize it. And my fear is, despite best intentions, this is sending us further in the wrong direction. Do you agree?
No, I wouldn't even come close to agreeing with that. Simply because, number one, as far as the getting comments out there and ginning them up, that's why those comments are no longer going to be public. They're going to be part of the State Department. They will just pass those on. So you're not going to turn this into to an open forum quite like that. I mean, as far as what you're talking about, you're correct in one thing in saying that already happened. So feel free to go on Twitter real quick and let me know if anybody runs into it. I can get you some of those conversations in about 5 seconds if you go onto social media right now. So you're correct in saying those conversations are already happening. So we can do one of two things. We can either sit there and go ahead and stay with the existing status quo and have everybody go online and to Twitter and to Facebook and Instagram and whatever else they want to do and go accuse our different schools of having this or that. Or we can make it very easily accessible to go online and say, hey, I heard this was in our school. Hold on a second. For about a 30-second search on this database, go, Oh, yeah, it's not there at all.
You're recognized for one more follow-up. Can I ask you back in the queue?
I genuinely appreciate that you don't see this the same way that I do. So let me your answers have sparked more questions, but I guess you mentioned something that I hadn't heard before in that last answer, and that was that these comments would not be a public forum so much as they would get passed on. To whom? And the reason that I ask is because there's one particular person over at the Department of Education who likes to get in his car and make shit up, and so my concern is that these comments will be selectively received, selectively shared for political purposes. Do you share my concern there?
No. I mean, if you want to talk about depoliticizing that position, I had a bill that could have done that too, but that's another conversation for another day, I guess. But to answer your question about who they're going to be shared by, they'll be shared by the district. If the district agrees with those concerns and wants to do something about it, it's up to the district. Again, we're not changing district policy here. We're giving them an additional avenue to receive that information. If they choose to ignore it, that's entirely on the district, same as it is right now. If a district wants to ignore the conversation, then you're going to get people going to the school board meetings, and again, go look online, you can see what that looks like right now. So we can continue to have those type of conversations, or we can make it easier for people to access the information and to take away some of those conversations.
Representative Provenzano, recognized question on the bill.
Thank you. I'll divert from what I was going to ask and tag into what he says, but the conversations we're seeing online aren't actually happening inside the district. It's often outside entities and that are making these comments. And so I'm wondering who this bill is really designed to help and support, because right now we have an existing law. Parents and citizens, parents and guardians that are enrolled in a school can come in at any time and examine all of this stuff. But if it doesn't happen, then that's when enforcement needs to happen at the local level.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if it's just, if in your opinion, if it's adding the state supervision, who are we really trying to help?
So respectfully, I would disagree that teachers or that parents can come in any time and view that information. There's no law. It's just, actually, if you'll read it, it doesn't say that. It says reasonable time. So they can't just pop up. It's totally false to say as a parent that I can just roll into a school at any point in time and demand to see any piece of curriculum at any point in time. That's just simply not factual. It's also what's not happening. So again, I'm going to go back to, you can view it as a negative that we're going to allow people in the state of Oklahoma to see what's going on in our schools. I'm going to view that as a positive.
You're recognized for follow-up.
Thank you, but I think I just voted in support of the state of Oklahoma being able to do that, just not a few days ago on a bill that you had. I'm concerned about these activist groups that are showing up at our school boards and creating chaos that don't have kids in the system, that this is what's going to empower them to create more chaos, and it's going to drive our teachers away. And I'm wondering, is that the point? I don't think so.
Well, it's definitely the point, and I guess I wouldn't say that everybody who's interested in this subject would classify as an activist group. I think there are activist groups on the right and there are activist groups on the left. I think that there's nothing this is not going to create activist groups. What this is going to do is going to allow people that are interested in this conversation, interested in what's going on in our schools, to have that conversation, to look at what's going on in there. Again, I'm going to say, I think it's a philosophical difference, I guess. I believe that, I've said it before many times, education is the single most important thing this state does. It also is the thing that impacts every single person in our state. And so therefore, if we don't have anything to hide, if our schools don't have anything to hide, why are we trying to cut people outside of our parents out of the process? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Representative Goodwin, recognized question on the bill.
Thank you. When you speak of activist, do you consider the word activist to be a bad word?
I was using the word that Representative Provenzano used.
You're recognized for follow-up.
Being that activist is not a bad word, and we need more activists in America, and I think it's a good thing, I'm concerned that when you are now wanting the teachers to download or upload their materials and what they're doing on this site, do you see how that could be subjective for the person that's actually looking at that material? Say, say you have someone that doesn't agree with the curriculum that's already been established, and I noticed you said that it would have to comply to some degree with state standards. Can you see that it could just be any person that just disagrees with what state standards are currently, books that are being read currently, and they could have a difficulty? And you said, well, look, they'll just show up at the school board meetings. Just because they show up at the school board meetings, does that mean that they have a credible concern as it relates to how our children are being educated?
I would tell you, first of all, it's not my role to tell people whether their concerns are valid or not. I think none of us in this building or sit there should be in that position to decide whether, look, to be honest with you, there are probably people in this room that have concerns that I don't think are legitimate concerns. I'm sure that they say the same thing about some of the things that I think are important. So I'm not going to sit there and say that one way or another. The reality is, again, somebody right now, we're basically limiting it to parents as it is now, and a parent can show up, to your point, and they disagree with the curriculum. They can disagree and jump up and down all they want. The district goes through their policy, and if they want to change it, they change it. If they don't, they don't. But again, it comes back, I guess, I didn't think this was a controversial issue to say that people in the state of Oklahoma should care about what goes on in our schools.
You recognize for a follow-up.
Would you agree that this is absolutely a controversial issue? And being that it is a controversial issue, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we talk about reading material, as I had a teacher just call me the other day, basic book about Ruby Bridges and history, that somehow that is offensive to some other parent. Can you see that subjectively, what could be good for a lot of folks, there could be one person, which has often been the case, in your words, it might be an activist, which I don't think anything's wrong being an activist. Can you see that it's subjective? And when you talk about the superintendent, we've got a state superintendent right now that says diversity, equity, inclusion is going to be attacked. Can you see how that could be a problem?
Well, to clarify, again, that was the representative from Tulsa's word, so you can continue to apply that to me. That was her word that she used, not mine. So don't try to pin that on me. You can have that conversation offline.
I'm not pinning anything on you.
Excuse me, you asked a question. Let me answer the question. So that was her word that I just repeated. That was her word in answering to her question. Now, beyond that, can it be that one person disagrees? Absolutely, of course. So if the information aligns to the state standards, then the school's not going to change anything, and they have every right not to change anything. Can you maybe give me an idea of which voices you'd like to silence? Which ones are you okay silencing? Maybe I'd like to answer that.
I'm going to let you have one more follow-up or answer his question back, and then ask you to get back in the queue. You're recognized.
Voices that should be silenced, quite frankly, I would hope any thinking human being would know anybody that thinks that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a bad idea. Perhaps those voices that don't want to include all of humanity in this world and in our curriculum and in our education, perhaps those are the voices that should be silenced. Would you agree?
Would I agree that, I kind of lost your train of thought there, but I guess I would say, I think in this country, with the freedom of speech and some of those ideas, I think we should probably listen to those instead of just deciding here exactly which voices should be silenced.
Representative Sterling, recognize the question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take this just a little different direction. Just a couple of quick questions. Is the organizations of COSA and OSBA taking a stance on this bill?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe I've had conversations with them about this specific bill.
Recognize for follow-up. He waves. Representative Goodwin, recognize the question on the bill.
Thank you. How much time do you think it's going to take for a teacher that's really trying to educate our students? How much time do you think, would you say this simple process is going to take on a daily basis if they have to upload every piece of curriculum, every teaching tool, every thought process that goes into a day? How much time do you think that's going to take up of a teacher's day?
Well, that's not included in the bill, so none.
Recognize for follow-up.
Is this bill not about teaching materials, books, text? It even says any other information is pretty broad. Do you not think that that is about this bill and a teacher is going to have to do that? Who is going to be uploading curriculum and tools that are taught in the classroom if it's not the teacher? Who would that be?
So again, if you notice what's been stricken out, so we're talking about textbooks. So already our teachers have to identify what their curriculum, what their textbooks are using. Right? So you understand that, right? So we're just going to sit there and go through, and then they're going to notify either the State Department or the vendor through the process, here's the textbooks. Then they sit there and go through, and the vendor themselves, as I mentioned on the earlier explanation, they sit there and add access to that textbook.
Recognize for follow-up.
And I do understand, and the tone and the insistence perhaps that I don't understand. I'm reading your words, and your words on page 2, if you'll look with me, right? So you won't think that I'm missing the point here. On page 2, line 10.
That's been stricken.
Well, okay, where has that been stricken?
In the amendment that you were handed out before.
On C? C? Where it says student activities, instructions, lesson plans, small group instructions, independent reading.
Yeah,
But
it
not
says by
limited to?
deleting subparagraph, I can read it to you, but it says
Okay, sure.
by deleting subparagraph C, D, and E in their entirety. So yes.
Thank you. I stand corrected, and I'm big enough to say when I'm wrong. Thank you.
You're welcome.
See no further questions, Chair, entertain a motion. We got to back up. Representative Bennett, you want to be in the queue? You sure?
I want to ask a question. I hope I don't get another chance to ask a question on the bill, because I hope I fail, but no, I don't ask a question.
Okay, wonderful. Seeing no further questions, Chair, entertain a motion. Have a motion? Do I have a second? And a second. Will there be debate? There will be debate. We're going to give 1 minute for each side, but what we're going to do at this point, we're going to stand at recess to 3 o'clock, and we'll be back. Representative Goodwin, you're recognized for 1 minute in opposition of the bill. You're recognized.
Oh, okay. Long story short, this is a very controversial issue. It's a very controversial bill. There's nothing that's simple about it. And when we start having government overreach, which I think often hear folks talk about here, this is a prime example of government overreach. And I would hope that we would allow our teachers and our folks that are really trying to do the work of educating, leave them be. To say, oh, they're going to have to share every waking moment of what they do and how they do it, it is not productive. I don't know what the cost is as it relates to this in terms of classroom time or any other time that a teacher might need. But then when you want to leave more stuff up to the State Department of Education, that's very disturbing, to say the least. When we have, again, a state superintendent who does not want to have anything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. DEI is in deity. Diversity, equity, inclusion is God.
Thank you for your debate. Representative Caldwell, recognized for 1 minute in favor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, I do believe this is a simple bill. I guess it boils down to, what turned into a couple things. Number one, if you believe our schools are better off being less transparent, then you're going to want to vote no on this bill. If you believe that your fellow community members should be cut out of the process about what goes on in their school, you're going to want to vote no on this bill. But if you believe that people in your community deserve to have a voice and understand what's going on in your school, then it's a yes. If you think things are better when they're more transparent, then it's a yes. As I mentioned before, with the amendment, all the stuff as far as with the teacher having to upload stuff, it's all been taken out of the bill. This just gives our community members a window. Would ask for your yes vote.
Thank you for the debate. Members, you've heard the debate. Please activate voting. Is that up? Good one, aye?
Come on, Regina. I thought I had you at the debate.
We're
Come
We're
on.
going to leave voting open here a little bit. Everybody's just getting back, having problems with your IT. Let's get logged back in. Please cast your votes. We've got McBride, Ford. Nay, McBride. Declare the vote.
8 aye, 24 nay.
Failing to receive the majority of the votes of the members present in committee, House Bill 2077 will remain property of A and B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.